This report shows how silicosis occurs, where it occurs, and what the disease is, and it makes recommendations for its practical control. Above all, the report emphasizes that these control measures, if conscientiously adopted and applied, that silicosis can be prevented.
Mining is a demanding job, and safety is our top priority. Exposure to silica can have severe health consequences, but with proper precautions, we can keep miners safe. Some may look at this creature and immediately think of the images only seen in nightmares. But it is actually a close-up of an ant. Yet still, many more people might think that these are the eyes. They are not. The eyes are farther back on the ant's head. Respirable crystalline silica, although not like an ant, is often similarly misunderstood. People jump to conclusions about where silica exists because they think that it's visible in the air, and believe that it is in the dirt and rock. However, these observations can only be confirmed with tools to test the levels of respirable crystalline silica. In other words, you don't know what's in the air or in the materials you are working with until it is tested. So, what is silica? Silica is another name for the chemical compound composed of silicon and oxygen with the chemical formula SiO2, or silicon dioxide. All silica forms are identical in chemical composition, but have different atom arrangements. Silica comes in the form of quartz, sponges, sand, cristobalite, and tridymite, to name a few. The two main types of silica are amorphous and crystalline, and they are different in structure based on how they cool. When silica is cooled rapidly, it doesn't have the time to align, creating an amorphous state. Whereas silica that cools steadily from its melting point will have crystalline structure like quartz. Silica is the most abundant mineral on Earth, making up about 28% of the Earth's crust, and it's in everything. Cosmetics, rope, skincare, vitamins. It's in food too. Green beans, bananas, leafy greens, brown rice, cereal, lentils, beer. And it's used in medicine for things like weak bones, heart disease, Alzheimer's, digestive issues, and hair loss. Yep, you heard me right. It's in beer. On average, beer has about 20 milligrams per liter. Almost 1,600 times the permissible exposure limit under the MSHA final rule. So what's the problem? If silica is so many of the products we consume, especially the products we consume so much of, how is it harmful? Silica is harmful when it's respirable and in crystalline form. Other forms like amorphous silica, which is found in things like diatomaceous earth, can still cause problems through exposure, but none have been found nearly to the degree that crystalline forms have shown. Knowledge of this problem is not new. Early humans worked with flint, which is a microcrystalline rock made of silica. If there was ever an earliest case, it could be with species like Homo habilis, the first known human to make and use tools. The historical record shows that in 300 BC, Hippocrates wrote about miners with breathlessness. And in the 17th century, the pathology of silicosis was documented in stone cutters. However, it's not until the 20th century that we find the U.S. government taking an active interest in the health and safety of miners exposed to respirable crystalline silica. In the 1930s, the first Department of Labor regulations on crystalline silica were written. In the same decade, the Bureau of Mines reported on adverse health effects of inhalation of silica while reviewing the Hawk's Nest incident.
In the 1930s, hundreds of men were hired to dig the Gauley Bridge Tunnel in West Virginia. They, too, were ignorant of the risks they ran. Desperate for jobs during the Depression, they worked with virtually no protection in a tunnel thick with silica dust. 476 men died here from silicosis.
My name is Walter Kincaid. I worked in the tunnel 4 or 5 weeks. Every day I hear of someone dying with silicosis.
Although congressional hearings were held over this issue, no protective measures were implemented at the time.
Altoona, Pennsylvania, November 23, 1937. Dear Ms. Perkins, would you kindly inform me about the doctors that examined those silicosis victims in the West Virginia tunnel case? Must a fellow just wait to die, or can someone do something? JTOD.
Honestly, the Department of Labor doesn't get serious about silica until the 2016 OSHA final rule, which is almost identical to the 2024 MSHA final rule. Silica could be in your mine site, drill sites, dump sites. But remember, it's not what we can see that's of concern. The problem is beyond the limits of our perception through human senses alone.
Are being analyzed to determine workers' exposure. Granite dust, particles of which can enter a workman's lungs.
Warning: workers exposed to respirable crystalline silica are at increased risk of developing serious adverse health effects, including silicosis, lung cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and kidney disease. What is silica in mining and construction? Silica is a common mineral found in materials like sand, stone, concrete, and mortar. It's so small that we measure it in microns, which are 1,000th of a milligram. Respirable crystalline silica is generated by high-energy operations like cutting, sawing, grinding, drilling, and crushing stone, rock, concrete, brick, block, and mortar, or when abrasive blasting with sand. So, what happens when you're exposed to high levels of silica?
Dust is inhaled into the lungs. The fine dust particles enter the lungs and settle in the terminal air spaces. Physical and chemical changes occur. Scar tissue forms. Small at first, these scarred areas grow larger as time goes on. This tissue is fibrous, tough, and inelastic, and the lungs cannot adequately perform their task of carrying air to the blood. As a result, the affected worker becomes so short of breath, he can no longer do his job.
Long-term exposure to silica can lead to silicosis, a debilitating and sometimes fatal lung disease. To put it simply, scar tissue builds up in the lungs when the silica cannot be expelled. The scar tissue is called fibrosis, essentially thickening the lung and reducing its capacity to deliver oxygen to the blood, and therefore the body slowly suffocates. There are three types: chronic, accelerated, and acute silicosis. Chronic usually occurs after 10 or more years of exposure at low concentrations. Accelerated develops 5 to 10 years after the first exposure. Acute silicosis occurs after exposure to high concentrations, followed by symptoms within a few weeks to 5 years. Symptoms include shortness of breath, severe cough, fatigue, and chest pain. Chronic silicosis may develop or progress even after exposure to silica ceases. And silicosis also puts you at greater risk for other conditions such as tuberculosis and chronic bronchitis. To protect miners, MSHA has established strict exposure limits. The permissible exposure limit, or PEL, is 50 micrograms per cubic meter over an 8-hour shift, with an action level of 25 micrograms. Employers must monitor air quality and assess exposure regularly. Mine operators must conduct exposure assessments, using air monitoring to determine necessary respiratory protection and evaluate the effectiveness of engineering controls. If exposure levels exceed the PEL, immediate corrective action is required, and results must be reported to MSHA. Minimizing silica exposure starts with effective engineering controls, such as dry dust collection systems, water sprays, and wet drilling, HEPA-filtered vacuums, enclosed operator cabs. Administrative controls also play a crucial role. Workers should keep work areas clean, avoid working in high dust areas, safely cleaning dust from work clothes, use safe cleaning methods like wet sweeping or vacuums with HEPA filters to remove dust from floors and surfaces. When engineering and administrative controls aren't enough, respiratory protection is required. Employers must provide properly fitted respirators and implement a written respiratory protection program following ASTM F3387-19 standards. Medical surveillance is essential. MSHA mandates periodic medical exams at no cost to miners, helping detect respiratory illnesses early and prevent long-term health complications. Compliance deadlines for the new silica rule are fast approaching. Coal mines must comply within 12 months, and metal, non-metal mines within 24 months. Ensuring compliance protects both workers and operations. By staying informed, following MSHA regulations, and using proper controls, we can create a safer mining environment. Your safety matters. Let's work together to keep our mines free from silica-related hazards. For more information on silica safety, visit the MSHA website or speak with your safety officer today. Stay safe, stay protected.